No one in that arena believed the limping man, dragging himself in silence with a busted stick for a crutch and that hollow stare, could be the most dangerous thing among them. Mocked by killers the crowd once cheered for, written off as nothing more than dead meat on display, he looked like just another poor soul walking toward the end. Quiet, still, as if all the violence around him was nothing but static in the distance, until his silence became something else. A warning, a promise. And when he stood without a limp, it was already too late for those who laughed first. The sun was brutal overhead, burning down on every bit of skin that dared to face it. In the middle of a makeshift ring carved out in the desert, ropes fraying, spears buried in the dirt, a mob howled for blood. Armed guards watched every inch. Nobody could run. Not the fighters, not the crowd. And there, under hundreds of hungry eyes, the man limped into the circle. Torn rags, hair wild. A rotten wooden stick pretending to be a crutch. His left leg dragged behind him like dead weight. His face was scarred, his eyes empty, or worse, caged. Across from him stood two young warriors, built like stone, spears in hand, eyes dripping with contempt, brothers in arms, trained killers. Everyone knew this wasn't a fight, it was an execution. "Bring in the cripple," one of the guards snickered. The man raised his head, took a long breath. The silence hit like thunder. No one remembered his name. They only called him the cripple. Spit hit the dirt by his feet. Someone yelled, "Take his other leg." The two warriors circled, twirling their spears with a rehearsed rhythm, a performance. They'd done this plenty of times before. The younger one lunged first, swinging his spear sideways toward the cripple's ribs. The crowd leaned forward, ready to taste the impact. But then something shifted. Before the wood touched him, the man let go of the crutch, just dropped it. He hit the dirt on one knee, not surrendering, coiling, loading the spring. With one sharp twist, he pulled that useless leg back, and like lightning, he launched himself upward with the other. In a blink, he was airborne. His elbow cracked into the attacker's jaw with a sick snap, dropping the kid limp to the ground. Out cold, dead silence. The second warrior stumbled back, rattled. The mob didn't know whether to scream or choke on their breath. The man landed on his feet. Solid. No limp, no pain, no hesitation. The leg was fine. The cripple had never been crippled. The second spear came slicing with fury. But the man ducked like a shadow slipping under light. His hand clamped the shaft, twisted hard, ripped it free. One smooth, violent spin, and the staff slammed into the warrior's chest, hurling him across the dirt. Dust rose. Two trained soldiers, down, humiliated, breathing only because he allowed it. The man turned to the crowd. Guards raised their weapons, itching to rush him. No one moved. The mob didn't laugh anymore, didn't jeer. They were spellbound by something they couldn't name. The man's silence roared louder than any scream. And then he spoke, steady, rough, carved out of years of swallowed pain. "How many times have you laughed at the weak? How many times did you stand silent while injustice played out right in front of you? Today, the worst prison is the silence of cowards." His words hit like iron ribs, snapping inside every chest. And just like that, he bent down, picked up the fallen crutch, and slipped back into his fake limp. Step after step, he walked out of the ring. The guards didn't move. Neither did the judges. Neither did the mob. Something in that man's presence froze the blood of tyrants. Something like truth. As he vanished into the shadows of tents and gaping soldiers, someone whispered in the crowd, "Who was he?" But no one answered. All that remained on the blood-stained sand was a shred of cloth tied to the crutch, stitched with a single red mark, Son of the Storm. Every man carries two names, the one he's given and the one he bleeds to earn. His birth name was Kyle, but that died with his wife and child, burned alive in a cabin fire 5 years ago in the border village of Elvhar. Back then, he still walked on two legs, still smiled, still believed in peace. Now he was only known as Son of the Storm, a title whispered in the shadows like a forbidden legend. Those who remembered his past claimed he'd once been a general, betrayed by his own army after refusing to slaughter a village of refugees. For that defiance, he was marked for death, but death spat him back out. He returned, not as a soldier, as a ghost, and ghosts don't take orders. The arena where Kyle fought was just one of many that rose after the Confederation collapsed. When the Southern Kingdoms splintered, the rich feasted while the poor were thrown to die for scraps of bread. The so-called blood games had become a spectacle, bankrolled by warlords. The fights weren't only for sport. They were tests, selections, a marketplace where the powerful scouted their next weapons of war. Kyle knew that, and he knew one thing more. His presence in that arena wasn't chance. Someone wanted him there. From a shadowed balcony, veiled by black linen curtains, Lady Sarin watched. She didn't clap, didn't cheer. She only smiled, a smile that never touched her eyes. Beside her stood a man in dark armor, his face hidden behind an iron mask. "Is it him?" she asked. The warrior grunted, nodding. "No doubt. Same eyes, same fire." Sarin's fingers brushed her lips. "So the rumor was true. He's back. Should we take him?" "Not yet. Let him believe he holds the reins." She turned on her heel and vanished behind the veil, leaving nothing but the scent of incense and intrigue. Meanwhile, Kyle walked the alleys of Cravamur, an underground slum carved into the bones of a fallen empire. No one there asked names. Faces bore only hunger, scars, and broken oaths. He was met by a young woman with braided hair and eyes far too old for her years. Her name was Lyra. "You made it," she said, handing him a flask of water. "They thought you'd be dead in 5 minutes." Kyle drank, wiping the dried blood from his mouth. "They thought wrong." She sat beside him on the cold stone floor. "You know they're hunting you, don't you?" "Sarin, the council. Nobody survives the arena and disappears. Not anymore." Kyle was silent at first, his gaze drifting to old war symbols scrawled in charcoal on the wall. "They left me for dead," he finally said. "Stole everything I was. Now, I'm what's left." "And what's that?" Lyra asked softly. Kyle looked down at his hand, still trembling from the fight. "A debt, one that will be collected." While the city slept, shadows moved across rooftops. Spies, soldiers in disguise. The name Son of the Storm spread like poison through taverns. Some whispered hero, others monster. The truth was simpler. Kyle had returned to tear down those who made him a ghost. And now, every last one who laughed would fall. "The problem with surviving hell," he muttered, "is that it follows you back." At dawn, Cravamur's streets stirred uneasy. Children begged quieter, doors creaked slower, even dogs held their bark. Blood spilled in the arena always splashed into the streets, and everyone knew something dreadful was coming. Kyle climbed a stone staircase with Lyra leading the way. Their path ended at the bone market, where weapons and memories sold for the same price. "They doubled the bounty on your head," she whispered. "Half in gold, half in forgiveness." Kyle raised an eyebrow. "Forgiveness? For deserters, mercenaries, even war butchers. Whoever brings you in erases their past." He stopped, meeting her eyes. "Forgiveness only matters to those with guilt." She swallowed hard. She knew Kyle carried something heavier than guilt. Purpose. Meanwhile, deep beneath Salmora Fortress, Lady Sarin studied a map. Beside her stood Commander Dreven, Kyle's former comrade, former friend, now her ally. "He shouldn't be alive," Dreven growled, pulling at his crimson cloak. "I watched him fall, 40 meters down the cliff. No one could survive that." "Ordinary men die," Sarin cut in, cold as steel. "Kyle was never ordinary." "Send me after him," Dreven pressed. "I'll make sure he doesn't crawl back again." She folded her arms. "We don't want him dead. Not yet. We want him to remember what he lost." Dreven nodded, but inside he knew. No one comes back from what Kyle had seen. Later that night, Kyle returned to Lyra's hideout. He smelled the smoke before he saw it. He ran, ignoring caution, ignoring shadows. The home burned with green fire, alchemist fire, the mark of Sarin's house seared into the wall. No screams, no bodies, only ash, and scrawled in charcoal across the scorched ground, dripping blood. You brought the storm. Now it will devour everything. Kyle dropped to his knees. His eyes didn't weep. His fists didn't shake. Only the fire burning in them betrayed what he felt. 3 days later, in Cravamur's mining tunnels, an ambush. Kyle heard the faint jingle of chains, the kind only trained spies could make. He rolled just as a poisoned dart thudded into the wall. 6 men, black masks, silent blades, no names. But Kyle didn't need names. He only counted breaths and broke bones. The first 2 rushed him at once. Kale dove low, dragging a blade from his boot, carving through one man's tendon and stabbing the other's thigh in one savage spin. The third grabbed from behind. A fatal mistake. Kyle bit his ear clean, spun the knife and drove it into the man's throat with surgical precision. The arena taught him cruelty. The army taught him efficiency. 3 left, not for long. After the fight, Kyle sought shelter in the Temple of the Fallen, where the names of dead soldiers were etched in stone, then scratched out if they turned traitor. He searched the columns until he found it. Kale Thorn, struck through, his hand pressed against the cold marble. You erased me. Now I'll make you remember. Footsteps behind him. It was Lyra, alive, burned, broken, but alive. You think pain is yours alone? She whispered. Kyle looked at her. For a moment his hard face almost cracked. But not yet, not here. They'll come for you again, he warned. She smirked, blood on her lip. Then teach me to fight. That night, as the city clung to its false peace, Commander Dreven studied the underground map like a predator. He survived again, a soldier muttered. Dreven snapped his fingers, a sharp crack. Then it's time to bring out what he fears most. And what's that? Dreven's smile was all shadow. The past. The age of shadows was over. Kyle was going to war, but what he didn't know was that his true enemy wore no armor. Sometimes the deadliest enemy is the one who carries your blood. The city of Cravamur still breathed in silence, but something had shifted. Kale saw it in the eyes of the merchants, in the darker alleys, in the pigeons that no longer landed on the roof of the fallen temple. They knew someone was about to die, maybe everyone. Lyra now trained with Kale in the ruins of an old steel foundry, under the glow of torches. Her stance was wrong, her strikes predictable, but her eyes carried something else, contained fury, buried pain, a hunger to survive. Kyle saw in her the reflection of the man he used to be. Don't think about the strike. Feel your enemy's breath, he said, spinning a wooden spear with lethal precision. And if he doesn't breathe? She asked. Kyle didn't hesitate. Then silence is the sound you listen for before you kill. Meanwhile, far to the north, a different plot unfolded in the high towers of Nevar, capital of the northern realms. There, in a secret council, 3 nobles debated the one they called the ghost of the arena. Kyle lives, said the first, an old advisor with ink-stained hands and a guilty conscience. Then Sarin failed, sneered the second, a bloated warlord, laughing as if it were a joke. But the third, whom even the crows avoided, stayed silent. His amber eyes burned as he placed a single iron token on the table, the mark of deserters. Kyle didn't return for revenge, he muttered. He returned because he discovered what we buried in Dravos. The others froze. Dravos, the buried city, the silenced massacre, the truth scrubbed clean from every record, and Kyle, the only one who crawled out alive. Back in Cravamur's arena, Lady Sarin announced something new, the Reaper's Game, a contest bound by time. 30 would enter, only 1 would leave, but this time the prize wasn't gold, it was freedom, or at least that's what they claimed. Kyle learned of it through Lyra, who overheard whispers in the market. They're forcing you back in, she said. throwing you into the pit with all the killers who once trained by your side. Kyle looked up at the sky, where the crows circled low. They think they can break me, but I've already been shattered. Lyra's voice trembled. And what if he's thrown in too? Silence. Kyle closed his eyes. He was Dreven, former partner, former brother in arms, the man who led the squad that slaughtered his family, even after being ordered to spare the civilians. A traitor, and the most dangerous memory Kyle carried. The night before the Reaper's game, Kyle and Lyra hid deep in the catacombs of Cravemoor. It was the only place where voices didn't echo. "Why did you come back, Kyle?" she asked. "It's not just vengeance. I can see it in your eyes." He hesitated, then finally answered, "Because someone has to break the wheel, and because the world needs to know. Even legends bleed." Lyra said nothing. She just squeezed his hand. And for the first time, he didn't pull away. Across the city, Dreven sharpened his twin blades in front of a cracked mirror. His reflection stayed calm. But inside, he knew, if he faced Kale, only one of them would walk away. And maybe, deep down, that was what he wanted. The arena was ringed with black torches. Time was running out. Kyle had until dawn to choose. Step into the Reaper's game, or vanish into the shadows. Return as a ghost, or ignite a revolution. And somewhere in the city, hidden beneath heavy cloaks, someone watched. An old man, with eyes like Kyle's, and a medallion identical to the one Kyle had buried with his son years ago. And then he whispered, "He still doesn't know. He isn't the last Thorn. The arena isn't made of sand, it's made of choices." Dawn broke far too quietly. The city of Cravemoor held its breath. In the central square, the iron arena stood ready. 30 names hung from wooden plaques, dangling on ropes like death sentences. But among them, there was one scratched through, one that shouldn't have been there, Kale Thorn. He had refused to enlist, and yet his name remained. "This is a trap," Lyra whispered from the shadows of the market. "They want you inside, even if it's just to kill you fast." Kyle stared at the name, crossed out, like on his tombstone. "They already buried me once. They just forgot to seal the grave," he said, tightening the straps around his fists. Beneath the arena, Dreven was being dressed like a pawn on a chessboard. He wore the light armor of the Storm Hunters, an elite unit disbanded after the Dravos massacre. But Draven never shed the uniform because he never forgave himself. "You know he'll kill you," Lady Saren called from a dark balcony above. Draven smiled faintly, eyes lost. "Maybe that's what I deserve. Or maybe he deserves to die all over again." She turned and vanished into the dark. Dreven gripped his blade and with quiet regret whispered, "Forgive me, brother." The Reaper's game began. 30 fighters, no rules, no mercy. Every minute, another death sentence. Kyle entered without fanfare, no armor, only scars and the weight of legend. But his eyes, steel. The first clashes exploded like thunder. Blood, dust, shattered bones. But Kyle moved as though he danced with death. 2, 3, 5 opponents. All fell. Not because he was stronger, but because he fought like a man with nothing left to lose. And then Draven entered, as if fate silenced the world just to hear them breathe. They faced each other in the center of the arena. The crowd screamed, frenzy all around. But to Kyle, the noise vanished. Only Draven, only the shadow of his past. "You killed my family," Kyle said. "No," Draven answered, lowering his guard. "I tried to save them. I was too late." Kyle charged. Swift, relentless. Steel clashed like thunder. The fight was different, intimate, painful, tragic. Every strike was a memory. Every dodge, a swallowed scream from the past. Kyle dropped him, but didn't finish. For a heartbeat, he considered letting the blade fall. Then, a sudden arrow. Not from Draven, from above, from Saren. But it didn't strike Kyle. It struck Lyra. She had crept too close, trying to warn him. about the second traitor. Kyle roared, not in pain, in choice. He ran to her. The crowd fell silent. Dreven rose but didn't stop him. Kyle gathered Lyra in his arms, alive but wounded. She knew everything, the girl murmured, about your brother. Kyle froze. My brother? On the iron balcony, Lady Sarin smiled. Behind her, stepping from the shadows, the old man with amber eyes, the same one who had been watching Kale. He doesn't know, the man said. He doesn't know he isn't the last thorn. Sarin nodded. And when he does, it may already be too late. The game ended. Kyle carried Lyra out. The crowd parted. For the first time, no cheers. Dreven stayed behind, watching, as if forgiveness were a wall he would never climb. But he still had a mission, and it tied to a past Kyle dared not remember. That night, Kyle sat by Lyra, tending her wounds, but inside something shifted. My brother is alive, and she knew it. The war was no longer Kyle against the world. It was blood against blood, and the demons were no longer outside. They were within. Some truths don't set you free. They chain you down. The skies over Kravamur swelled heavy. Lightning split the horizon, but no rain followed, only a charged silence, as if the world itself held its breath before the storm. Kyle kept Lyra alive with stolen herbs and crude bandages. She slept, fevered, her body fighting the venom that came with the arrow. But Kyle found no rest. Her words hammered in his mind like nails. Your brother is alive. He had no brother, or so he thought. For years, he clung to memories of a father slain in battle, a mother buried beneath the Confederation flag, and a childhood built on cold and silence. But now, it all felt like a lie. Meanwhile, Dreven returned, not armed, not as an enemy, but as a messenger. He found Kale outside the temple, washing dried blood from his hands. Without ceremony, Dreven spoke. Sarin lied to us all. Your brother was taken before Dravos fell, raised as a project, a ghost, trained to replace you. Kyle didn't turn, but his silence cut deeper than any blade. He leads the Night Hunters now, the last of them, the deadliest. Dreven dropped a scroll on the stone. The thorn seal split in two. At last, Kyle spoke, low, poisoned. He knows I'm his brother? Dreven hesitated. He knows, and he was trained to hate you. Lyra woke in the dead of night, her eyes glazed, her pulse weak. You will go after him, she whispered. Kyle held her hand tenderly, so unlike the man who broke necks in the arena. I don't have a choice. He's my blood. But if Sarin turned him into her weapon, then I'll be the blade that breaks the chain. She smiled faintly, fever burning. Then teach him how it's done. In the stone halls of Salmora Fortress, Lady Sarin gathered the hidden council. Before her stood Kale's brother. Codename, Blackthorn. Same eyes, same stance, but empty, hollow. No empathy, no memory. Are you ready to face him? Sarin asked. He didn't answer. Instead, he drove a knife into the map, straight through Kravamur. Sarin smiled. Then take what's left of the storm and erase what the wind forgot. Kravamur began to empty. The news spread like plague. The Night Hunters are coming. Undead soldiers under the command of the elite, ghosts clad in steel. But Kale didn't run. He prepared, with Dreven, and the few still brave enough to resist. Lyra, wounded yet unbroken, guided the civilians. She was no longer just a student, she was a commander. Kyle built a trap, old tunnels, hidden triggers, beams rigged with fire. When the Night Hunters came, one of them would fall, or all of them. And there, beneath the torchlight, Kale donned the armor he swore never to wear again. He stared at his reflection. Brother, you don't have to die. But if it comes to that, let it be as a thorn, not as a ghost. On the last night before battle, the wind shifted. For the first time in years, Kyle felt fear. But he also felt something else, faith, not in victory, but in something greater, the chance to be different, to break the cycle. The storm was coming, and on the horizon, two brothers closed in on each other, one to kill, the other to save. Both scarred, both carrying the same name, but only one would walk away whole. Some men fight for revenge, others for the chance not to make the same mistake twice. Kravamur, now a cocoon of resistance, had turned into a staging ground for the end. Kyle, Draven, and Lyra spent their final days rebuilding traps, drilling civilians, redrawing escape routes. The people no longer saw Kyle as the cripple of the arena. Now he was something else, the hope that bleeds, but never falls. One morning, Lyra, still wrapped in bandages, slipped a dagger into her boot and gave Kyle a crooked grin. "If you die before me, I swear I'll drag you back just to kill you myself." Kyle let out a rough laugh. "Fair." She stepped closer, and for the first time touched the metal pendant he never removed, the one engraved with his son's name. "You thought protecting meant staying away, but we only fight well for what we choose to hold close." Kyle said nothing, but something loosened inside him. For the first time, he let Lyra hold the pendant. That afternoon, a messenger left a box at Kravamur's gates. Inside, a severed head. It belonged to an old soldier, one of the few who had stood with Kyle at Dravos. Alongside it, a message: "The Black Thorn is coming." Kyle stood still, not in rage, in quiet pain. He lifted the head with respect, buried it beneath a dead tree, and said only, "We won't die for old wars. We'll fight for a new name." That night, Draven found Kyle alone in the abandoned forge. "You still mean to kill him?" Draven asked flatly. Kyle answered slowly, "I mean to free him. If that means killing him, then yes. And if he's you, Kyle, the man you used to be, the one who only saw darkness." Kyle stared into the furnace flames, then replied, "Then I'll show him what it means to walk through the dark and keep moving." The plan was reckless, but time had run out. The night hunters would attack in 3 days. They'd use the tunnels, bring poison gas, chemical fire. They were used to wiping cities off the map. Kravamur was an easy mark, but Kyle knew the paths, knew the rhythm of death, and now he knew how to improvise. With Draven, he built an explosive system out of dry powder hidden in tainted water flasks. With Lyra, he laid false trails and crafted sounds to scatter the hunters, cutting them off. But the riskiest part was his own. Kyle would surrender, let himself be taken, force his brother to look him in the eye, the man he'd been trained to hate. 2 days later, the plan began. Kyle walked alone to the valley's mouth, arms wide, no weapons, no armor, and as expected, he was captured. Not by just any soldier, by the Blackthorn himself. Inside the enemy camp, Kyle was chained, but he held his head high. The Blackthorn approached, same height, same build, eyes a mirror. "You're weak," the brother said, his voice muffled by the mask. "You became legend by accident. I was shaped by truth." Kyle stared back. "Steady, human. You were shaped by fear. I survived it." The brother raised a hand to strike, but hesitated. Something trembled in his fingers. Kyle saw it. The crack, the doubt. But before he could speak, the alarms blared. Kravamur was striking back. Kyle was no prisoner now. He was the spark. In the chaos, Draven and Lyra stormed the enemy camp. Explosives hidden in blankets, smoke blotting out the stars, screams in every direction. Kyle tore free of his chains. His brother still hesitated. But now, eye to eye, Kyle said, "Kill me now, or come with me and find out who you really are." For a moment the Blackthorn faltered, and in the clash of fire and shadow, Kyle reached out his hand. The choice was made. But which one? Before the thunder, the world holds its breath. Before the fall comes silence. The smoke of battle still clung to the air like a shroud of unsaid memories. Kravamur had held. The tunnels had not collapsed. The city still stood. But the question whispered among survivors was simple. At what cost? Kyle walked the soot-covered streets. Wounded soldiers, children hauling rubble. Men who yesterday only knew how to run now held spears. His face was no longer a symbol of fear. It was the face of a man who hadn't abandoned his people when hell came knocking. Lyra, shoulder still bandaged, commanded the reinforcements. Her orders were sharp, swift. No one dared defy her. Stake the north gate. They'll make one more push before the end. Kyle stepped close. Blood dried on his skin and touched her arm. You've become everything they feared, Lyra. A flame they can't extinguish. She didn't smile. And you've become something they can't kill. On the cliffside, Drivan watched the valley. With a map in hand, red marks drawn with his own blood, he sketched the city's last defenses. They'll come again, he muttered. But this time, with everything. Kyle joined him. Sarin doesn't just want me gone. She wants to erase the idea that a man can break the cycle. Draven nodded. You get one chance, just one, and it's not against the hunters. It's against him. Silence. The Black Thorn. Kyle's brother had vanished during the counterattack. Not fled, simply disappeared. Kyle knew. The hesitation in his eyes was real, but a soul forged in hate doesn't change with words, only with impact. And impact was coming. That night, Kyle sat by the fire with Lyra and Draven. For once, they didn't speak of plans, death, or ambushes. They spoke of the world they wanted, what they'd do if they survived. Lyra said she wanted to open a school. Draven said he longed to return to the northern mountains, where no one knew his name. Kyle stayed quiet. Then, almost like a confession, I'd like to learn to laugh again. A real laugh, not one that ends in pain. Lyra met his gaze. Then live, and I'll teach you. The next dawn, Kyle found a note at his tower door, handwritten, the script familiar. I'll be waiting, alone, at the Broken Wind Ravine, at sunrise. Thorn. Kyle understood. His brother had chosen. This wouldn't end with Sarin, it would end with them. Draven objected. Lyra begged, but Kyle was already moving. If I don't go, he'll come with blood in his eyes and bring the world down with him. Kale armed himself with his father's blade, forged from shards of his armor, and a dagger made from the melted chains of the arena that once humiliated him. 2 pieces of pain turned into strength. At his departure, Lyra stopped him. You said you wanted to laugh again, then come back, even if it's just half of you. Kyle smiled, for the first time true. I'll come back, with half my body, or with the world on my shoulders. At the ravine's edge, a silhouette waited. 2 brothers, 1 duel, 1 choice. And as the sun broke over the mountains, the storm was ready to fall. When the thunder goes quiet, the truth starts screaming. The Broken Wind Ravine cut the earth like a scar, its gales howling as if they were trying to remind the living of the dead. There, between high cliffs and knife-edged rock, 2 men waited for dawn. Kyle, the Black Thorn, brothers, enemies, 2 versions of a shattered past. Kyle moved first, climbing the plateau with steady steps. His black cloak swung behind him like a silent war banner. The Black Thorn was already there, mask on, blades across his back, not in a fighter's stance, just waiting. You came, he said, voice muffled by steel. Kyle stopped a few paces away. You asked. Could have been a trap. Kyle let out a dry laugh. I've lived through worse. For a long beat, only the wind answered. Then the Thorn pulled off his mask. And for the first time, Kyle saw his brother's eyes. They were his own, but empty. She said you abandoned me, the Black Thorn began. Sarin, she gave me the name, trained my body, hollowed out my mind. Kyle said nothing. Silence was the only shield that fit that kind of pain. She said you were the weak one, that you left me to die when the village burned. Kyle closed his eyes for a heartbeat. Breathed. I was a child. I didn't even know you'd been born. She killed our mother, buried our name, and turned you into the weapon I failed to be." The thorn stepped in. The first blade tore the air. Kale slipped aside on instinct and drew his sword. The duel began. It was brutal. Two bodies built to kill, two very different styles. The thorn was precision, technique, calculated hate. Kale was survival, instinct, pain with a purpose. They collided like thunder-splitting mountains. Every strike sparked, every step carved the ground. But the fight wasn't only flesh, it was ancestral, emotional, feral. And Kale was losing. The thorn was younger, faster, unshaken. Kale took a deep cut to the shoulder, another along his ribs. He fell to his knees. The thorn touched steel to his throat. "This is how it ends," he panted. "Exactly like they said." Kale looked up and smiled. "She told me you were hollow, but I see you now. And what I see is choice." The thorn wavered. "You're not her, brother." Silence. The blade trembled. "You are Thorn, but you can still choose what that name means." Then the turn came. High on the cliff, Lady Sarin rode in on a black horse, archers at her back. "Enough sentiment," she shouted. "Kill them both." Arrows flew. Kyle shoved his brother aside. A shaft buried itself in his already wounded shoulder. The thorn hit the ground beside him, gasping, and saw with his own eyes Kale step between him and death. For the first time in his life, someone protected him. Something cracked inside. When Zarin called for the final volley, the thorn roared, "No!" He sprang up, drew both blades, and charged the archers like lightning, like a storm reborn. Kyle followed, bleeding but unbroken. The clash on the ridge was fast and vicious. Sarin tried to flee, but the thorn was faster. One cut and her mount went down. She hit the stone, hurt but alive. On her knees, staring up at the brothers, she smiled. "You think you've won? Men like me built this world. Men like you will burn it down." Kale stepped closer, looked to the thorn, and did the last thing anyone expected. He lowered his sword. "It's over," he said. Still breathless, the thorn faced the woman who made him. He turned her, pressed hot iron to her face, and marked her. She would live, scarred, voiceless. "She doesn't kill me anymore, and she doesn't decide who I am." The battle ended, but the war had already died before the blood dried. Two brothers, no longer shadows, no longer weapons, just men. Together they walked back to Crevemure, not as legends, but as the start of something new. The end of a war isn't silence, it's rebuilding. Crevemure woke to the smell of charred wood and fresh bread, an unlikely pairing, but true. Where trenches and traps had been, rebuilding stakes went up. Where screams once lived, hammers spoke. Where fear stood, hope took root. Kyle walked the streets with a bandaged arm and a ripped cloak, but his eyes were clear. For the first time in years, no shadow. Beside him, the thorn, unmasked, wore plain clothes. The city still watched him with caution, but no one struck. Head down, he hauled stone blocks to raise the new city gate. "This is how it starts," Kyle said, pausing to watch. "How?" the thorn asked. "With small weights, carrying not the past, but what comes after it." Lyra, fully healed now, organized the new guard. Men and women who had only survived now learned to protect. She smiled when Kyle approached. "If you take any longer to assume command, I'll declare war on you myself." Kale smiled back. "Too much paperwork. I'd rather be the ghost who fixes things off the books." She stepped in and touched the pendant still hanging from his neck. "You don't have to fight alone anymore, and you never have to disappear again." Kyle took her hand, and this time he didn't let go. In the square, Driven read Lady Sarin's sentence: exile, perpetual silence, branded traitor. The people watched quietly. Not out of fear, out of respect. She was led away without protest, without glory, a shadow carried off by the wind she'd tried to command. That night, a fire burned in the heart of the city, not for war rites, for stories. Children listen to tales of the man who faked a limp to fool monsters and the mirror-eyed warrior who became a brother when he learned to choose. Kyle listened from a distance, didn't interrupt, just wore a small, honest smile. Before sleep, the thorn joined him atop the wall. "Tell me this is only the beginning," he said, half skeptical. Kyle looked out at the mended streets, the waking people, the turning cycle. "No, this is the end of our war." Silence. Then the thorn spoke, voice nearly breaking. "Thank you, brother." Kyle answered without turning. "Call me that now, because you chose to." 12 years later, a child runs through the restored ruins of Kravamur with a wooden sword and a painted scar. "I'm the son of the storm," he shouts. On the hill, a man watches, grey at the temples, eyes at peace. Kyle smiles. At his side, the thorn helps raise a small school where laughter rings instead of screams. At the city's edge, buried beneath stone, a forgotten blade gives the faintest hum, and a nearly erased inscription still fights the years. Legends don't die. They sleep. You've just met the story of two brothers, divided by lies, reunited by the choice to break a cycle of pain. And you? How many times have you worn armor to hide an old wound? How many wars do you fight in silence? If this story reached you, share it. Tell it forward. Carry the truth that even the lost can find themselves again, and that real power isn't in winning, it's in choosing differently. Son of the Storm lives in everyone who refuses to be shaped by hate. Are you one of them?